We estimate that across the country, 320 million pounds of food will be wasted with this Thanksgiving. And I know pounds are not necessarily transferable everywhere. So if you want to look at some other metrics that help bring this to light, that's about $550 million worth of food, or 267 million meals. And we're talking about a single day of waste that is generating all of that. And the equivalent of the emissions coming out of that meal is 190,000 gas-powered vehicles for a year. Alongside this conversation of Thanksgiving in abundance is food access, right? And especially the disproportionate access to our communities of food. This juxtaposition of abundance and lack of access that becomes really visually apparent, right? If we were to not address food waste, I think we're going to risk them getting worse, right? We're going to risk those different areas becoming kind of more divided, more polarizing, more apparent to us personally in our day-to-day lives, and seeing that and how it's affecting us and our families.
Welcome to Don't Waste This, a podcast by WRAP, the Global Environmental Action NGO. This is a series about what we stand to lose if we don't fix the broken systems that we all rely on for our food, products, and everyday essentials, systems that still follow a wasteful take, make, dispose model. This season, we're focusing on food and the issue of waste. Around the world, families and friends sit down to enjoy meals together, ingredients and dishes that carry meaning, memory, and identity. But every year, around 1.3 billion tons of food never gets eaten. That's nearly a third of all food produced globally. And when food is wasted, it's not just nutrition we lose, but also the water, energy, land, and human effort that went into growing and producing it. The consequences are huge. Currently, if food waste were a country, it would be the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. Food is wasted at every link in the chain, from growers and retailers to our own homes. In this season, you'll hear from people on the front lines of change in the global Food Pact Network. Together, we'll explore how food shapes culture and identity, the challenges of food waste around the world, and how local action is building a global movement. We'll spotlight the solutions already underway and ask one urgent question: why must we transform our food system? Welcome to Don't Waste This. I'm Talia Shalev, International Partnerships Manager at WRAP, and I'm here today to chat with Tara Dalton from WWF and Jackie Suggett from ReFed, two organisations who lead the US Food Pact, to talk about the global food system crisis and what's at stake in the United States if we don't fix it. Welcome, Tara. Welcome, Jackie. Thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't we start by getting to know you both a little better? So could you introduce yourselves to the podcast audience? Maybe Jackie, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for having us, Talia. It's great to be here. Jackie Suggett. I work for ReFed, which is a nonprofit exclusively focused on what we lovingly refer to as the world's dumbest problem, which is food waste here in the U.S., and really proud partners with WWF on leading the U.S. Food Waste Pact.
Thank you, Jackie. And Tara?
Hi, yes, I'm Tara Dalton with WWF, working as a circular supply chain manager on the food loss and waste team. And WWF is working on food loss and waste because agriculture is the number one driver of biodiversity loss on the planet. Great to be here. Thank you.
Before we get into the real issues that we're here to talk about and some of the more technical aspects of what's happening across our planet and also in the US, I wanted to start by getting to know you both a bit better in terms of your relationship with food and what food means to you. For me, food is incredibly emotional, as I like to share with everybody that comes on the podcast and then anybody else that will listen. And it's very much at the heart of who we are and our cultures as people. So, Jackie, starting with you, it'd be good to know that what would the food be or the meal be if you had to choose one dish that represents the US or something that's particularly special to you and your country? And then we can talk a little about the risks around that dish afterwards.
Sure. Yeah, Tara and I talked a bit about this. It was hard to identify like a dish necessarily that really felt like it encapsulated the American food cuisine, so to speak. But when we're having this conversation right now, Talia, we are actually a week away from the American Thanksgiving holiday. So we were thinking about that meal as a whole. So the turkey, the stuffing, the apple pie, and what that meal represents on its own. There are certainly, I think, historical and cultural challenges with the holiday that we don't want to gloss over, but it is, in the way that it's celebrated right now, a time of gathering, a time of community. It's also a time of abundance. Interestingly, and this statistic actually shocked me, but 90% of people who cook a Thanksgiving dinner intentionally prepare to have leftovers. Right? I'm not sure there's another meal that we make throughout the year where we intentionally, just universally as a culture, intentionally over prepare. So I think in the way that we celebrate Thanksgiving, in the food that we make, in the way that we handle that food, it actually is a really great case study for some of the challenges and solutions around food waste more broadly.
Absolutely. I mean, that idea of having far too much to make sure that we have some leftover is a very joyful feeling, definitely for me, thinking about what I can go into the fridge and have the next day. But not everybody thinks about it in the aspect of what they're then going to do with those leftovers, not in all cultures anyway. And it's very interesting to see what stems from that in the US, especially around the idea of leftover sandwiches, leftover wraps, pies. We definitely try and incorporate that post-Christmas in the UK too. But if we think about some of the risks that are associated to those meals, I'm interested to know from your perspective if there's like a key fact or story that comes to mind when you think about food waste and what's happening in the US at the moment.
Yeah, let me maybe start at kind of the 10,000-foot view, and then Tara and I can maybe each share a more specific example of how that may manifest itself. But we do a report every year where we look at how much food is actually wasted on Thanksgiving. And we estimate that across the country, 320 million pounds of food will be wasted with this Thanksgiving. And I know pounds are not necessarily transferable everywhere. So if you want to look at some other metrics that help bring this to light, that's about $550 million worth of food, or 267 million meals. And we're talking about a single day of waste that is generating all of that. And the equivalent of the emissions coming out of that meal is 190,000 gas-powered vehicles for a year. So macro level, it is certainly a big issue. It's also not representative of every day, but I think that's why it's interesting to look at this as we have this conversation today. It is somewhat intentional, right? It is we are culturally encouraged to behave this way on this day because of the way that we're celebrating. So maybe just two specific examples of other challenges that may come up. I'll talk really quickly about some of the supply chain uncertainty in planning. So I actually went to look this up. Like, what was the last year that we had a turkey shortage? And it was 2022, but we're actually expecting one again this year, which I didn't know. So good to know as I'm planning my shopping for next week. But because of avian influenza, right? So things that are actually not directly associated, we may not think about as a food waste issue, but just supply chain challenges of, if there's a bird flu, that can impact the supply chain leading up to Thanksgiving. It's also a very compressed supply chain time, right? We're talking about a day and time where companies are actually planning for months to have the inventory they need within their supply chain for that day. Maybe a funny example is my family is also Canadian, and the Canadian Thanksgiving is actually over a month earlier. It's in October. And we live in the States right now. And so we were like, oh, we want to have a Canadian Thanksgiving. Like, let's go find a turkey. We could not find a turkey because it's not November, like a large turkey. We ended up, though, finding stores. This was the first week of October that had already shipped in their turkeys for Thanksgiving, the end of November, but had them frozen back of house. So we were able to get one, but it was interesting just to see like how much planning and preparation and kind of front loading of the supply chain happens because of the heavy demand that comes for a very compressed purchase cycle around that holiday. So I think that throws into sharp relief just the importance of our supply chains and how they're not as linear and simple as we see them being, and that can actually have a really big impact on the waste that we see all the way down through to consumers.
No, absolutely. And Tara, was there anything in particular when you're thinking about Thanksgiving and what it means to you and the work that you're doing that you wanted to share?
Yeah, well, I love that stat that Jackie shared about like 90% of home chefs over Thanksgiving this year are intentionally over preparing the amount of food. I mean, I think in general, beyond, and that comes from a good place, right? Thanksgiving is about, if you're doing it right, it's about celebrating the harvest and giving thanks and big community coming together. Everyone kind of jokes about falling into a turkey coma, right? When you've had too much pie and cranberry sauce and all the turkey. And so everyone kind of knows that, and that's kind of expected, and it creates warm feelings. But I think overall, the United States has this sort of culture of abundance and over portioning that leads to some negative outcomes, including the declining health of Americans, both young and old. And then it leads to a great amount of food waste as well. And I just think about kind of the contrast of this with my German grandmother, who, daughter of immigrants. She grew up during the Great Depression. And for her, when she was cooking a meal, she would always try to get the portioning exactly right. Like it was a success if there were no leftovers. And she knew down to like the nickel how much money she was spending per meal. We see this practice of like over portioning, right, coming out even in our U.S. Food Waste Pact work with businesses. So this past year, we just wrapped up a pilot on low waste events and worked with several sites across the country, aiming to find out what are the key factors leading to overproduction of food in events in the hospitality space and how can we address them. And it was found that really overproduction and a lack of portion specifications in the kitchen was leading to a lot of this kind of over production and a great amount of the waste. Chefs were often going by feel, and there's such a drive from the venue side to not displease the client or the planner, right, by running out of food. That's everyone's worst fear, right? Running out of food when you've got hungry guests, or whether it's in a Thanksgiving home or in a hotel. So they would way overcompensate. And so through our pilot, we were able to get the event planner, the client, and the venue all talking together to make some small changes that led to really big wins. Just for example, instead of serving one dessert per guest, we went down to a half a dessert per guest. And for bread rolls, we went from 1.2 bread rolls, convinced the chefs and the bakery there to just go down to 0.8 bread rolls per person. And you know what? They still had a lot of waste in both items, but a lot less than they would have before. And so that was just kind of a good example there of how you can still have this abundance, right? But there's still so much room to cut down and be kind of more reasonable and use certain strategies to kind of avoid the waste that typically occurs in hospitality due to this. We really tried to emphasize quality over quantity, right? I think that can be another sort of cultural pitfall we sometimes fall into, that more is better. But we talked with them about, if you have an oatmeal bar here and you've got 8 different toppings to go on the oatmeal bar, is that really needed? Can you make them be 4 toppings that are just really high quality and really good? So it led to a lot of great conversations, and obviously it's going to be not a cultural shift we can make overnight, but I think some of these case studies coming out on low waste events that we'll be publishing can kind of help start the conversation.
I mean, it's great work. I've seen some of the examples of what you've been doing recently, and I completely agree. The hospitality sector is such a difficult one to tackle, especially when you're trying to please the assumptions of what you think your guests or your clients might want. And having just been at a friend's wedding over the weekend, and we had this, family style sharing meal, and there was a lot of food, and that to me is what you want us to see in a celebration. You really don't want to be counting your peas on your plate, but there was definitely going to be waste left over in order to ensure that everybody had a little bit of everything. I guess that's like the mentality, and that's, as someone who works in sustainability, incredibly anxiety inducing, but for everybody else was the most wonderful parts of the evening, because there was so much they could try, and it didn't cross their mind that there might be some left over at the end of it, and what are we going to do with all that food? And there is so much that we need to do to change that norm or that understanding from the consumer's perspective. But that starts also with, changing the habits or the behaviors of what we're providing to those consumers. And I guess it's not going to happen overnight, but it's great that you're already engaging with some of the businesses in that sector to help them to look at those innovative solutions that will drive down waste en masse, probably.
And Talia, I think your example highlights something why this is so hard is because often the intentions are good, right? It's not that I wake up or a hotel chef wakes up and say, gosh, I really want to throw away some food today. But Exactly. It's culturally within our families, our communities, but also even from a business perspective. And there's certainly the business drivers behind this as well. But we want to feed people. That's how we express love. And we are bringing in guests into our homes. You don't want to run out. It comes from a good place, especially kind of in a consumer mindset. And that's what makes it hard, right? It's not something people are doing wrong per se that we're trying to shift. It's actually what it can be seen as a positive behavior that is having unintended consequences. And so from an individual level to a corporate level, I think that through line is there. But yeah, intentions are harder to change, right?
Completely. And as you said, it comes from a good place. So you don't want to put people on the spot and make them feel guilty for their good intentions. And it's a really hard place to navigate when you start to bring in those emotions, which it is very much fundamentally driven by. So you briefly touched on it, Tara, in terms of the work that the US Food Waste Pact is doing. But could you tell the audience a little bit about the US Food Waste Pact in the first place in terms of what it is you're setting out to do and how long you've been around for?
Yeah, happy to. So the U.S. Food Waste Pact, we're a national voluntary agreement to help food businesses achieve their waste reduction targets. And it's designed to really go beyond just commitment setting. I always like to say it's a commitment with teeth, to really actually driving meaningful progress through pre-competitive collaboration, data collection across the supply chain. And we were launched, oh gosh, Jackie, correct me here, it was the end of 2023, right?
Yes,
did we make an announcement at COP?
December 2023, I think.
Yeah, I always forget because it was right at the end of the year there. So 2024 was really our kind of launch initial year. So we're coming up on 2 years old. We like to say we're a toddler. And, we're walking now. We've definitely proven out the model and seen a lot of great success, but we have a lot of great growth to go ahead as well. We've found a few key strategies to be very fruitful for this pre-competitive work with companies. And Jackie, I invite you to jump in as well, but just a few that I was going to name. Employee engagement has been a major way that we've seen success in engaging with our companies. You can have all the best corporate targets in the world around food waste, but if you don't have good employee engagement strategies on the ground, then they're not going to get fully implemented, right? And our companies realized this, and they, had kind of like a lot of compassion for kind of the frontline worker and employee and wanting to get them involved. And so definitely, if folks haven't before, they should go and check out the U.S. Food Waste Pact Employee Engagement Toolkit. There's just a lot of resources that we've built up there, and videos and testimonials from frontline workers that have participated across the years in our pilots around employee engagement. We've also seen just a lot of success through the conversations happening in our working groups. We have various 4 different working groups now on a variety of topics such as food recovery, staff training, and engagement. A new one that we launched this past year was on consumer engagement and environments, which I think is just exciting to mention because it really shows kind of the evolution, I feel like, of our businesses' mindset and thinking around this, that they're really seeing all the waste that's occurring downstream at the household and consumer level and wanting to impact that, right? And recognizing their role in it. So excited to see where that goes. And then we've also had a great kind of success with our whole chain projects. And I do want to give a nod to WRAP here for first inspiring us with their whole chain tactics and strategies that they've taken. We took a lot from that when we started developing out our own whole chain strategies and work here in the US. And what is a whole chain project? Well, it's really taking one commodity and studying it from farm to fork, mapping out where do the spots occur. And then once you're able to see really where the waste is occurring and why, being able to recommend targeted solutions. So I'll just give our whole chain project on strawberries here as an example. We worked with 4 different retailers and a major strawberry supplier to identify where the waste was occurring along the strawberry whole chain, supply chain. And turns out that about 36% of the farm supply was being lost, or 36% of the farm harvest was being left in the field, and 25% was edible, fit for human consumption. So then that kind of raises the question of how can we develop new market channels, right, for these edible but maybe not retail grade strawberries. So as a part 2, we were able then to engage our food service companies under the U.S. Food Waste Pact to look at utilizing these edible strawberries that previously didn't have a home, and finding new ways of processing them in a food service kitchen, right? And getting them into onto the plates of consumers. So we're very excited about that pilot, and the case study will be coming out in January, right about, I think, when this podcast should be airing. So check it out.
Thanks, Tara. And Jackie, was there a specific example or success story that you wanted to share in terms of what the US Food Waste Pact has been doing since its launch 2 years ago?
Yeah, I'll maybe just first add on to one of Tara's and then add one of my own. But the employee engagement stuff is honestly just some of my favorite work we've done. And what I love about it is it's so additive overall to the solutions that we already focus on, right? Because the solutions that are coming from frontline employees are not the solutions that are coming up in boardrooms, right? Both are important. You need to have both approaches. But the ones that we were getting, they're low cost, they're low tech, but they're high impact. And it's using a screwdriver to tighten a grain line. It's like that, that's not going to come up in a corporate strategy session on how to reduce food waste, but it's a really tangible, easy example of how giving a megaphone to the people on the front lines actually brings a whole new set of solutions to the table that aren't cannibalizing or competing with the work that's happening elsewhere, but are 100% additive to that. So I really love that work. So I wanted to plus one what Tara said. The other thing I'll add is it's a less riveting topic, but I think really important is the data side of the work, and the way that we approached the U.S. Food Waste Pact, not unlike many of the others around the world, is really intentionally around data collection, progress tracking, using data to drive action and prioritize solutions, et cetera. So leaning back into the 4 or 5 years of the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment that was really the starting place and the generation point for the U.S. Food Waste Pact, over that time, we saw up to 30% reductions in unsold food rates in participating retailers in the Pacific Coast Food Waste Commitment and the U.S. Food Waste Pact. So at a time where globally and nationally as well, it's inconsistent in how we see reductions and increases in waste across different sectors. I think that group of signatories has really leaned in, and that's not all attributable to the work they do through the pact. That's their own initiatives that they're doing outside the pact as well. But they've leaned in, they've shown that progress can happen, right? And that fluctuates year to year, certainly as there are external factors like the COVID-19 pandemic or supply chain challenges or inflation, et cetera. But they're showing that a dedicated, concentrated effort on food waste does, in fact, reduce food waste. And I think that that's half the battle, is the case study for, is the investment of human and capital resources worth the outcome that we get at the end of the day? So being able to showcase that is something I'm really excited about through the work that we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the US, you are very good at communicating that return on investment to the businesses to demonstrate the value for them to be involved, even just from a cost savings perspective, but also then in terms of raising awareness. And as you mentioned, one of the aspects being around engaging with employees, but also those at different levels, seniority across the business too, which is incredibly important and not as easy to do in every country that we have a pact in, depending on cultural differences as well. So really great to hear that that's working and that you're going to keep emphasizing that as part of the activities that you do going into next year as well. And Tara, you mentioned this, and then we appreciate the shout outs in terms of the support that you're getting from other organizations across the Food Pact Network. And we know that food waste is not a national issue, it's a global issue. And you've been part of the Food Pact Network since its inception back in 2024. So I was wondering if you had any examples, or if you're able to speak to how the Food Pact Network has helped you to make progress outside of the support that you've been getting from WRAP over the last few years.
Yeah, happy to. It's been a really impactful community to become a part of. I think before it officially became like a global food pack network, there was some, we had like in connections with certain individuals here in this country there, or that one there, and we'd reach out, if we'd say, oh, we kind of heard that they did like a bread case study and we're thinking about a bread case study, so let's hop on a call, right? But it'd be very kind of ad hoc like that, and it would be just we'd realize there was like a lot that we didn't know about what was going on, right, with each other's programs. And so what I've really loved about the Global Food Waste Pact like network and community coming together in a more concerted way is just that facilitating that sharing, right? When we published the employee engagement toolkit, we were able to really quickly and efficiently share it with all of our peer networks. And we got a lot of interest and folks wanting to follow up with us and ask questions. Likewise, when we're thinking about engaging in a new whole chain project, or have a question about a certain resource around maybe fundraising, or oh, how do you manage your working groups, we've been able to tap that group and just ask folks for giving us different examples of how they've made certain things work. So it really is a way of just accelerating everyone's progress by not always starting from scratch and trying to figure it out right in your own country drill hole. And we've really appreciated that. Not to mention that supply chains are very international, right? And I think there's so much more there that we haven't tapped yet that we could, about recognizing these corporations that we work with across country lines, the supply chains that we all want to work on collaboratively together. So I'm really excited for that. I think that's coming in the future too for that community.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely a topic or an area of opportunity that a lot of PACs have indicated an interest in terms of starting to really engage with those multinational corporations and looking at the issues from a global supply chain perspective, which I really see as an opportunity for our activities over the year to come, which is really exciting. And Jackie, we've talked about progress, but there is still a matter of urgency. We have targets that we're all trying to hit. Some are coming up quicker than others, and we want this issue to be dealt with, maybe not resolved. I don't know if we'll ever get to that point of complete resolution. But I was wondering if we think back to the Thanksgiving meal and thinking about the components and the ingredients within it and the significance of it, as you described as well, to so many people, families and communities. What do you feel might be lost if we don't, as a society, not just as a packed network, really engage with this issue and this crisis that we're still definitely facing at the moment?
Yeah, candidly, I think we're seeing a lot of that impact already. And it's not to say that good work isn't happening, but I think we're starting to see the impacts of how this could become worse if we don't continue to address it. So a few areas. One, I think we've all become shockingly familiar with how the economy and inflation works around food prices in the last few years coming out of the pandemic. That's been a global experience for many of us in our generation. It's the first time we're seeing that level of impact on our things showing up on shelves, our food prices rising. I wish I had this stat with me, but the average price of the Thanksgiving meal is notably higher this year, and that trend has gone up in the last few years. So you're seeing that play out on the actual grocery bill when you walk in to the grocery store as well. And that's going to hit people next week when they're going and shopping for their meals. Another topic we really haven't brought up yet, but I think is really important to have alongside this conversation of Thanksgiving in abundance is food access, right? And especially the disproportionate access to our communities of food. And this is also kind of the kickstart of our holiday season leading into Christmas. So I think there's also a mindset and a focus around gratitude and service and community engagement. So we see an uptick in that. It's unfortunate that it is seasonal, I think, unfortunately, but I think that's another area where we're seeing more disproportionate access across our communities to food. When you have this juxtaposition of abundance and lack of access that becomes really visually apparent, right? And I think people are aware of that. And then you add in those economic inflationary facts as well, and I think that only makes it worse. So I think I don't know that there's some new tragedy awaiting us down the road. I think we're already kind of seeing a lot of these impact areas. If we were to not address food waste, I think we're going to risk them getting worse, right? We're going to risk those different areas becoming kind of more divided, more polarizing, more apparent to us personally in our day-to-day lives, and seeing that and how it's affecting us and our families.
And that will only be inherited by those in future generations too. If we don't deal with it now, those instances of crises will be perpetuated globally as well.
Exactly. Yep.
And it's obvious that you're both very passionate about this work. I mean, this kind of work really requires people that are driven and passionate to keep pursuing areas within sustainability, but also specifically around the food system crisis. So I'm curious to know if you're able to share what motivates you on a day-to-day basis to keep working in this space and to keep pushing forward with what you're doing. Tara, I don't know if you want to start.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll start by saying I think food loss and waste is such an amazing topic to be working on because there's really something in it for everyone, right? Everyone has a stake in this. I personally came at it from kind of my background was more in like nature preservation and sustainable farming as well. And so I really kind of come at it from that environmental lens, I'll say. And, that's fitting since I work at WWF, World Wildlife Fund. And as I mentioned earlier, WWF is working on food loss and waste because agriculture is the number one contributor to biodiversity loss, primarily as a result of the conversion of land to farming and grazing. But you'll find, Jackie probably has a very different reason that brought her to this work. And I find, the businesses we're working with, there's just the pure profitability of it as well, of reducing food loss and waste. So that's why I really love working on this topic.
And for you, Jackie?
Yeah, and I did come from a different angle. I kind of started my career more interested in the public health side of issues, maternal health, nutrition. And I started my career in retail focused on sustainable nutrition. And so I grew up professionally, so to speak, kind of knowing all of those statistics and realities around food access and hunger. And I actually still remember the meeting I was sitting in when I heard for the first time, at that time, 40% of our food goes to waste. And my brain had this little moment where it couldn't comprehend how both of those realities could exist. How could 1 or 7 or 1 in 8, depending on the time, Americans be food insecure and hungry, and 40% of food going to waste? And that's better known now, but to me, like, a decade ago, 15 years ago, that was really kind of a light bulb moment for me of, I don't understand how both of those realities can be happening at the same time. So it was several years later that I got to finally dive deep into food waste. And I think that that human side of it, in addition to the nature and environment sides, is really what motivates me, is how do we close that gap between those two realities.
And has there been a moment recently where you felt that from like a day-to-day perspective that you are actually on that path and you are making that difference that you set out to do?
Yeah, I think the challenge of working in sustainability, as Tara said, that the pro is, I think it connects to everyone on a human level. The downside is, I think it's pushing a big rock up a big hill, right? Like, progress can be slow, it can be disheartening at times. So I think the fact is those two realities still exist. Where I find hope, though, is I think we do, as we said earlier, we do see these nuggets of progress where, like, things are actually changing. And some of the specific examples that Tara shared, even with the whole chain work and the employee engagement work, I think are illuminating. But for me, one of the things that excites me most is 10 to 15 years ago, if I told people I worked on food waste, they'd be like, food what? Like, it didn't kind of click for them. And now people love it. They're like, oh, you work on food waste? That's so cool. Like, I compost is 90% of the time the first thing they say to me, but there's an interest there. There's a recognition that, oh, like, this shouldn't be a thing that happens. And I think there's just this general awareness that we can all be doing better and we need to be doing better. So that mindset shift to me in the last decade or so, I think is one of the things that really gives me hope.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to that feeling of feeling that recognition that you start to get from your peers and your family, where sustainability isn't such a difficult buzzword to understand anymore. But there's still obviously many misconceptions around what that actually means. But there is more and more awareness that's being raised, and that comes from the work that organisations like yourselves are doing, which, you know, we're all very excited about and hope that more and more people join us on that journey. So let's imagine for a moment that, you know, we fix the food system crisis tomorrow. I mean, hopefully there'll be other work for the three of us to do aside from this. But for you, Tara, what would change for people and for the environment and for the future of the Thanksgiving meal in the US look like?
I think if we fixed, the problem tomorrow and the US was no longer wasting, 31% of our specific food system, it would look like better and more equitable access to healthy foods. And I think that's important as well. I do think, the connection here to human health, we can't ignore, and it's super important, right? I think ReFed has this stat that only 12% of the food that could be donated in this country actually makes it to its end destination, right, to those in need. And so I think we'd see definitely a change in that, in which food donation and recovery was much more the norm, much easier, right? I used to work in a food bank, and I remember around this time at Thanksgiving is when you'd have your biggest influx of donations. You'd have suddenly every volunteer group wants to sign up, right, between the time of Thanksgiving and Christmas. Mm-hmm. And that's great and wonderful. And I love that the holiday season inspires that in Americans. But I think, if we truly fix the problem, we would not see that sort of holiday jump. It'd become a year-long sustainable thing in which these food recovery organizations are getting that food intake that they're needing, right? And we have much better distribution systems for it. Jackie, what do you think, though?
I'd agree with everything Tara said. And I think, some of the other issues we brought up earlier around the supply chain inconsistencies and the economics. I mean, ideally, we're fixing those too. Those are big macro issues, though, right, that aren't only driven by food waste. So I think we have to, be realistic about kind of the broader global economy and food system. But I think, when I think about Thanksgiving, I think the other thing is we don't want to take away celebration either, right? I don't think any of us are like, we want to be so strict on food waste that there's never time that you can really link, because food is cultural. Food is familial and community based, and it is meant to be a part of celebration. So I think it's okay if there's still a spirit of abundance around Thanksgiving if we're planning it right? Is it just a very specific example for you? Are we thinking about the seasonality of the foods that we're making and purchasing? Are we thinking about pre-planning what we're going to do with those leftovers afterwards? Are we, to Tara's point, being mindful of how we're giving back in a societal way with the abundance that we do have to ensure that there is access for everyone around this holiday season? So I don't want to take the culture and the celebration out of food when we talk about solving food waste, but I think it's more about how can we continue to elevate and allow and promote that while also being mindful and strategic about solving food waste where we can within that experience.
And I really appreciated the fact that you brought to the podcast an element of celebration, then how much food plays a role in that, because that's not just a Thanksgiving opportunity. It's not just a US opportunity. That's something that we experience across many communities and many religions all throughout the year. And there'll be many people that can relate to that feeling of abundance, hopefully, and celebration and joy that comes from those moments. And definitely there's that aspect that you said, Jackie, about raising our ability to be mindful of what we're consuming and why and what we do with it, and considering others in society and their place in those celebrations too, Tara, as you've mentioned. to make it matter for the right reasons and make sure that we're not continuing to do more damage to our environment and to others around us as well. And that's what this is all about, really. So we've talked about culture, and we talked about our communities and joy around food and celebration. We've also talked a bit about the environmental impact that we're seeing in terms of food waste and within the food systems crisis. And I really appreciate you both sharing what has personally driven you to this work, what brings you to work every day, and what keeps you on track in terms of motivating you to keep working at this, because it's not an easy space to work in on some days. So before we finish up, I was wondering, we asked all of our guests if they can do this. It's difficult, but in 10 seconds, I'm going to give you both 10 seconds, don't worry. We'd like to know what you feel is the most urgent message that you would like our podcast listeners or viewers to take home with them, to make sure that they understand why we need to fix the global food system crisis. I'll leave it up to you as to who wants to go first.
Yeah, I'll jump in first, just because I fear mine might be the slightly more pessimistic of the two, and Tara's really good at leaving us on a high note here. And I don't mean it that way, but I think if we start my 10 seconds now, I think, we need to fix the global food system, because I think we have structurally and philosophically designed it wrong, right? We hear a lot that it's broken. I actually think it works pretty well for how we designed it. We just didn't necessarily design it in the right way. A great example of that is we're talking about food waste. We are calling it waste. It was designed into the system to be acceptable to waste food. And I think we need to reframe that as value that we can capture.
Brilliant. And Tara, are you going to leave us on a high?
Yeah, that wasn't pessimistic at all, Jackie. That was great. No, I would say we need to fix our food system, because, as I was saying before, the food system is this ultimate connector between people, nature, environmental, humanitarian, and business issues. The food system is just quite simply how we sustain ourselves. And there is a lot of reason to be hopeful, though. We see policy, we see global headwinds, we see technology all driving us towards solutions to solve this thorny problem.
Thank you both. I really appreciate that. And the messages are strong and they are clear, and hopefully heard by lots of our peers, and hopefully in the US as well, but also those more globally. We started this podcast or this episode by talking about Thanksgiving and what it means to you both. It's not something that I've had the joy of experiencing yet, but maybe at some point I'll get a chance to. And it's really, really special to hear what it means to both of you and what it means to your communities as well. So thank you for sharing that. And what you've also helped to shine light on is what we can do, what we can improve, and what we can make better, whilst also continuing to share that joy around food and community and bringing our families together, and being cognizant of the impact that we can have to the people around us as well as part of that celebration and those cultural moments and those traditions. So thank you. And hopefully we can continue to do the work that we're doing and protect those traditions for the generations to come. So yeah, all I have to say is thank you both.
Thank you, Talia.
Thank you for having us.
You've been listening to Don't Waste This, a podcast by WRAP, the global environmental action NGO transforming our broken product and food systems to create circular living. In this series, we've explored the actions already underway to transform our food system and stop something that's so precious from being wasted. But with a challenge so urgent, more action needs to happen. The Food Pact Network, convened by WRAP, is connecting the countries featured in this series to scale climate-smart solutions and drive the systemic change needed to produce, share, and consume food without waste. We need businesses, philanthropists, non-profits, and governments to join us and scale action faster. Discover the impact we're already having and find out how you can take action to transform our food system by visiting WRAP's website.